The discovery in the dust. The sun sat low over the horizon, painting the skies above Embark village with streaks of orange and violet. Birds returned to their nests, and the tall grass swayed with whispers of ancient secrets. Eboli wiped the sweat from his brow as he leaned on his hoe. His hands, calloused and sore, trembled with exhaustion, but he could not rest yet. Hunger had crept into his home like an uninvited spirit, and he had no choice but to push through the pain. The baobab tree stood alone at the edge of his farm, towering like a silent guardian. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember, older than the oldest elder. Children were warned to never dig near it, told stories of buried kings and cursed spirits. But Eboli, desperate and half-starved, had reached a breaking point. A tree so large, he muttered to himself, must hide something in its roots. He dug with urgency, not knowing what he hoped to find, perhaps a tuber, a hidden spring, anything. The soil grew unusually hard, resisting his efforts. Then, his hoe struck something solid. A dull, hollow sound echoed beneath him. His breath caught. He dropped to his knees and used his hands to clear the dirt. Slowly, he uncovered a mask, ancient, carved from wood that hadn't decayed. Its surface was etched with strange markings that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. It had hollow eyes, an open mouth, and a strange symbol carved onto its forehead. He should have left it. But Eboli was poor, and desperation does not listen to caution. He lifted the mask carefully and wrapped it in his ragged cloth, casting one last glance at the tree. The wind howled strangely as he turned back toward his hut. That night, he placed the mask on his mat and stared at it by firelight. It seemed almost alive. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and for a moment, he thought the mosque's mouth twitched. He laughed nervously, rubbed his eyes, and lay down. Soon, sleep took him. In his dream, he stood in a palace made of gold and fire. A tall figure wearing the mask appeared before him, crowned in black feathers. The figure did not speak with words but with thoughts that invaded Eboli's mind. "You have awoken me," it said. "I am Obandu, king of secrets. I can give you wealth, health, power. But every gift has its price." "What price?" Eboli asked. "You will know in time." He woke with a start, heart pounding. Morning light peeked through the cracks in his hut. He rubbed his face, trying to shake off the dream. Then he saw it. His granary, which the night before had held only dust and cobwebs, was full, overflowing with yams, maize, and beans. His water pot, cracked and dry, now brimmed with clean water. Even the chickens that had stopped laying eggs clucked busily, their nests full. Eboli's jaw dropped. He stumbled back into his hut, staring at the mask. It sat where he had left it. Silent. Still. He whispered, "Was it you?" The mask said nothing. But in his heart, Eboli felt the answer. Over the next few days, more strange blessings appeared. A traveling merchant offered him a goat in exchange for one of his old wooden carvings. A hunter dropped by and left him 2 fat rabbits as thanks for letting him rest in the shade of the baobab. People who once ignored him now greeted him with smiles. Word began to spread, Eboli's fortunes have changed. But behind every blessing, he saw the mask watching. His neighbors began asking questions. Old Mama Chinwe, who had lived nearly 90 seasons, narrowed her eyes and muttered, "Strange things happen to those who meddle with the old spirits." The village chief's son joked, "Maybe Eboli made a deal with the gods." Eboli laughed with them. But when night came, and the shadows stretched long, he couldn't stop. Hearing Obandu's voice in his dreams. "You will know the price." One evening, Eboli tried to hide the mask deep in the forest, beneath rocks and thorns. But by morning, it was back on his mat. His wife-to-be, Asha, the healer's daughter, visited and noticed how tired and distant he had become. "You carry a heavy burden, Eboli," she said gently. He forced a smile. "I'm just not used to being lucky." But even as he spoke, he felt the mask humming with power. Riches beyond rain. Morning in Embahe was no longer the same for Eboli. Where once he awoke to a leaking roof and the growl of an empty stomach, now he rose from a fresh mat, his hut filled with the scent of roasted maize and sweet herbs. Even the birds outside seemed to sing his name. Everything had changed since the mask arrived. Eboli now walked through the village like a man reborn. His steps were light, his pockets heavier. Traders he had once begged from now offered him their finest goods. Farmers came to him for advice on their crops, and children stopped to ask for blessings. Though he had not shared the secret of the mask, all knew that fortune had found him. He began expanding his hut. What started as a single-room shelter soon became a compound with carved doorposts, woven mats, and walls painted with the dye of rare leaves. He employed local carpenters and paid them well, ensuring their silence. The poor boy who once mended tools for a meal was now the wealthiest man in Embahe. And still, the mask whispered. More. Eboli tried to ignore it at first. He focused on his newfound love, Asha. She had been kind to him even before the mask, offering herbs for his aching joints and sharing fruits when he was hungry. He proposed to her under the moonlight beside the baobab tree, the same place he had unearthed the mask. "I don't need a grand ceremony," she told him, "just your honesty and peace." But peace was the one thing Eboli could no longer promise. Even on his wedding day, the mask called to him. He had hidden it inside a clay pot wrapped in goat skin, but the voice found him in his thoughts, deep and tempting. "You have only begun to taste the wine of kings," Obandu's voice echoed. "There are treasures buried beneath your reach. Just ask." Eboli kept silent. He told himself he was in control. That the mask could do no more than whisper. But the mask was patient. Shortly after their marriage, Asha noticed strange changes. Eboli began to sleepwalk, his feet covered in red dust by morning. He woke speaking foreign words, his eyes distant. Once, she found him digging near the granary in the dark. "What are you looking for?" she asked, fear in her voice. I don't know," he replied, trembling. She urged him to see the village priest, but he refused. "I just need rest," he lied. One morning, Asha returned from gathering herbs and found their courtyard full of strangers, men from distant lands dressed in fine linen and carrying boxes of golden spices. Eboli welcomed them like old friends, offering gifts and boasting of ventures he had never spoken of. "They came to invest," he told her later. "They said they dreamed of me and were drawn by fate. Or something darker," she whispered. But Eboli was too far gone in the sweetness of power to hear her warning. Weeks passed. Gold coins flowed through his hands like river water. His goats multiplied, his fields grew lush even in the dry season, and wild honey appeared in his stores without explanation. Still, the mask murmured, "More." One night, the voice grew louder. "Your neighbor, Kofi, plans to steal from you. You must act." Eboli jolted upright, drenched in sweat. He looked out the window toward Kofi's hut. A torch flickered inside. He watched for signs, for any movement. The next morning, Kofi came to borrow a calabash. Eboli refused. "Go find your own," he snapped. The villagers noticed the change. He who had once been generous and kind was now suspicious, sharp-tongued, and guarded. Children stopped greeting him. Elders shook their heads when he passed. Even Asha began to distance herself. She found solace in her garden, whispering prayers to the ancestors. At night, she would lie awake, listening to Eboli mutter to the mask in his sleep. One evening, she finally confronted him. "Eboli, what is this mask you keep hidden? What power has it given you that takes away your joy, your peace, your soul?" He stared at her, eyes tired and haunted. "I thought it gave me everything," he said. "But it keeps asking for more." "Then let it go," she pleaded. "I tried," he whispered. "But it comes back." She held his hands. "Then we will fight it together." That night, for the first time in weeks, Eboli slept without dreams. But the mask remained in its clay prison, humming softly, like a storm waiting to rise. The price of power. The rains came late that season. The villagers of Embahe, who once looked to Eboli with admiration, now avoided him. Whispers followed him wherever he went. His animals remained healthy, his fields lush, but the joy in his eyes had dimmed. Something inside him had shifted, like a drumbeat thrown out of rhythm. The mask had grown louder. No longer did it wait for dreams to speak. Now, in daylight, its voice filled his ears like a swarm of bees. "Blood is the price. Give me blood." At first, Eboli resisted. He thought, perhaps if he gave gifts to the gods, poured palm wine on sacred stones, fed the beggars, or prayed beneath the baobab, the voice would be satisfied. But the mask was not a god. It was something older, something darker. One morning, Eboli awoke to find two of his goats lying lifeless in the compound. Their throats were slit cleanly. No predator had done this. No thief had entered. The mask sat undisturbed in its pot. But it was wet with blood. Eboli stumbled backward in terror. Had he done this in his sleep? That day, he dug a pit in the forest and buried the mask. He covered it with heavy stones and thorn bushes, and walked away without looking back. But that night, it returned. It lay on his mat, silent but pulsing. Asha found him curled in a corner, whispering prayers with trembling lips. "We need help," she said. "Let me take you to the priestess in Ukunu." "She cannot fight what lives in my blood now," Eboli whispered. That night, the mask spoke again. "You try to bury me, yet you owe me still. Feed me." The next morning, his granary was empty. His gold vanished. His goats fled. Even the strangers who had once surrounded him like flies had disappeared without a trace. The curse had begun. Eboli, desperate, offered a hen. The mask laughed, a low, dry sound that rattled the walls. A hen for a king. Insult. He tried again. A goat. A ram. A black cock with feathers like midnight. Each time, the prosperity returned, but for shorter and shorter spans. Eboli grew wild-eyed. His hair thinned. His fingers shook. He stared into shadows, expecting betrayal from every corner. His voice, once full of kindness, now cracked with suspicion. One evening, Asha confronted him once more. "This thing you serve is not wealth. It is a sickness. I cannot stop," he said. "If I stop, everything dies. Then let everything die." He raised his hand in fury, but stopped himself. Shame filled his face. He dropped to his knees. "I don't know who I am anymore." Asha held him tightly. "Then let us find you again." The next morning, the village elders appeared at his gate. The chief's guards stood behind them, spears gleaming in the sun. "Eboli," said Elder Ojoma, "the land speaks. The spirits speak. The mask you uncovered is cursed. It has begun to rot the air of Embahe. Your blessings have turned to poison. You must bring it forward." Eboli stood silent. "If you refuse," said the chief's son, you will be banished." The villagers watched from a distance, holding their breath. Finally, Eboli nodded. He returned to his hut, lifted the clay pot, and stepped outside. All eyes widened as he uncovered the mask. It shimmered darkly, and the air grew heavy. The sky shifted, clouds rolled in, dark and swirling. Thunder cracked though there was no rain. The ground trembled. The elders began to chant. They formed a circle around the mask, reciting sacred words long forgotten by many. But the mask laughed. "You think you can silence me?" It roared. "I have drunk the greed of kings, the fear of men, the silence of women. I am older than your gods." Eboli fell to his knees, clutching his head. Blood dripped from his ears. Asha broke through the circle and scattered healing herbs around the mask. She held a calabash filled with sacred water from the river in Ukunu. Chanting in her mother's tongue, she poured it over the mask. Steam hissed. A scream, not human, echoed through the sky. Then silence. The mask split in two. The clouds cleared. The wind stilled. Eboli lay unconscious, the curse broken, for now. But in the crack of the mosque's remains, a symbol still glowed faintly. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the forest, something stirred. The curse unmasked. 3 days passed before Eboli awoke. The village had grown quiet, as though afraid to disturb what had just been silenced. Asha had not left his side, her hands red from tending to his fever, her lips dry from whispering prayers. When his eyes opened, they were no longer filled with fear, but sorrow. "The mask," he whispered. "It is gone," she replied. Broken by truth and prayer. But even as she spoke, she knew it was not the end. The villagers held a gathering under the ancient Iroko tree. Elders, warriors, healers, and even children came, their faces drawn with worry. Elder Ojoma stepped forward, lifting the split mask high. "This thing," he said, "was not just an object. It was a vessel." He turned to Eboli. "You did not bring this curse upon us from greed alone. You disturbed what should have remained buried. But the spirit within the mask did not die, it was released." The people gasped. Asha stepped forward. "Then we must seal it again. Bury it deep, bind it with words and water." But the village priestess, Mama Ukara, shook her head. "No, the spirit has tasted freedom. It now roams. It will find another vessel. Another soul." A child in the crowd began to cry. A distant drumbeat echoed in the hills, none had been playing. Eboli stood shakily. "Then I must finish what I started." "No," Asha said. "You've suffered enough." But he shook his head. "It chose me. And I must be the one to end it." With the blessing of the elders, Eboli and Asha set off toward the forbidden hills beyond Ukunu. It was said that the original shrine of Obandu lay there, long abandoned after its priests were struck down by a plague of madness. Few dared go there. None returned. Their journey was harsh. The land grew wild, the air thick with whispers. Trees leaned inward, as if trying to listen. Asha carried her mother's staff, and Eboli held the broken halves of the mask, bound in white cloth. At night, Obandu returned. This time, not in dreams, but in the flesh. From the shadows of the forest, a shape emerged. Towering, feathered, with glowing eyes and a voice that shook the earth. "You broke my mask," it hissed. "But not my will." Eboli stood his ground. "Leave this land. Your power is no longer welcome." Obandu laughed. "You think the land is yours. I was here before the first drum was carved, before the first goat was herded. I fed kings. I punished liars. I lived in the whispers of power. You fed fear," Asha said, stepping forward. "But we are not afraid." The spirit snarled and raised its clawed hand. Fire burst from the ground, circling them. Asha gripped her staff and slammed it into the earth. A wave of blue light pushed the flames back. Obandu roared. Eboli unwrapped the mask halves. "I bound you once," he shouted. "Now I end you." He held them high and began to chant the words the priestess had whispered into his ears before he left, an ancient binding passed from mouth to ear through generations. The wind screamed. Obandu lunged. Asha leapt forward, striking the spirit's chest with her staff. It howled and staggered. Eboli finished the chant, and the mask pieces began to glow. With a final cry, he slammed them together. A burst of light swallowed the forest. When the light faded, Obandu was gone. The trees straightened. The air cleared. The earth grew still. All that remained was a pile of ash, and the mask, now turned to dust. Eboli collapsed, his strength spent. Asha cradled him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It is over," she whispered. "It is finally over." The spirit had been banished, not by gold or fear, but by courage and truth. A new dawn in Embahe. The sun rose gently over the village of Embahe, casting golden light over the red earth and tall grass. It was the first dawn in months that arrived without dread or shadow. Birds chirped, drums beat in rhythm once again, not with warning, but with joy. Eboli and Asha returned after many days in the forest. Though weary and covered in dust, they were greeted like warriors returning from battle. The elders poured libations. Women ululated. Children ran barefoot to welcome them, laughter echoing through the air. The spirit of Obandu had been sealed. The curse lifted. Eboli stood before the village square where once he had been ridiculed, then worshipped, then feared. Now, he stood as a man made whole, not by wealth, but by healing. "I do not ask for your praise," he told the people, "because I have learned that praise given too quickly can become poison." He looked at Asha. "I only ask that we learn to live by what we plant with our own hands, not by shortcuts given in shadows." Elder Ojoma nodded. "Wisdom often comes late, but when it comes, we must drink it fully." In the days that followed, Eboli gave away what remained of his riches. He shared goats with widows, gold coins with orphans, and tools with the farmers who had once fed him. He rebuilt huts that had crumbled, and helped restore the shrine that had been abandoned due to fear. The elders named a sacred grove in the forest after him, Okpulo Eboli, the path of redemption. But Eboli did not seek titles or attention. He returned to simple life, farming with Asha by his side. Together they planted yams, cassava, and vegetables. Their harvest was never abundant, but it was honest. It was earned. The spirit of Obandu, though gone, had left behind lessons that echoed in every corner of the village. People no longer chased after sudden wealth. They remembered that all things gained without effort carried hidden costs. That the unseen world was powerful, yes, but not to be played with or bartered. One evening, Eboli sat beneath the same baobab tree where he had first found the mask. The earth where he had dug now bore a young sprout, a sapling that had grown from nothing, watered by rain and time. Asha joined him there, her hands still stained from harvesting okra. "Do you think it's truly over?" she asked. "I think the worst of it is," he said. "But the lesson must remain. That is the true victory." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then maybe one day, we'll tell our children. So they'll know never to bow to voices that offer everything for nothing." He smiled. "And maybe we'll teach them to listen to their own inner voice, and not the whispers in the dark." The wind rustled the leaves above them. But it no longer carried secrets. Only peace. Years later, the story of Eboli and the mask became part of Embahe's oral tradition. Griots and drummers told it around fires, warning the young never to let desperation lead them to dig where silence sleeps. Eboli lived to see many harvests. His hair turned silver, and his back grew bent, but his heart remained upright. And Asha, wise, brave Asha, became a healer respected beyond the borders of Mbehe. Women traveled from faraway villages just to learn from her. Together, they taught that the greatest wealth is not in gold or goats, but in freedom from fear. The mask was gone, but its memory became a guard, a lesson etched in the soul of the village. And so, Mbehe flourished. Not through magic, not through shortcuts, but through truth and love. The end.